Hey, this is Andrew, and this video series is hopefully going to show a little bit of what I've learned to help save time and increase productivity in spreadsheets. And I'm using Google Sheets specifically, but a lot of the things I'm going to cover also apply exactly the same in Excel. I'm not an expert, but I hope that that'll actually make my explanations a little more easy to understand, and I'm happy to answer questions posted in the comments as I have time. Remember that you can pause and rewind the video at any time if I go too quickly. So we're working through building a budget in a Google Sheet, and we've done spreadsheet basics. And this lesson we're going to talk a little bit about functions. So we're really going to get into the interesting stuff with an introduction to functions. And for the objective we've got, colleagues will be able to use math functions to subtract and combine values. So let's jump right in and see what this is going to look like. We're going to take the structure that we built from last lesson with just a basic budget with different categories and different months, and we even broke down one of the categories into subcategories, and we're going to turn it into something that has monthly totals, difference from projected budget, average monthly costs by using different mathematical functions. So this is what we're going to try to add and teach you how to do this lesson. So let's start with just some basic information about how spreadsheet applications, both Excel and Google Sheets, work. If you click on a cell, you can type in text, which is what you're probably used to doing. But there's another kind of hidden feature, and that is using functions by pressing the equal sign. And that indicates to Google Sheets and to Excel that you're going to be performing specific operations. So if, for example, you just wanted to do a quick little math problem, you could actually type 6 plus 6 and press enter, and it would show 12 because you typed in the cell equals 6 plus 6. Now you can edit a cell by double clicking here or by clicking on it and then clicking up in the formula bar here. And so you can explore different mathematical operations, like you can say, all right, what's 8 plus 8 and then divided by 2, and you can use any of the normal mathematical operations that you can think of in this way. When it starts getting interesting is when you start, instead of using numbers, using cells and adding cells together. So let's see how that would work. Again, you would type equals and say I wanted to add these two cells together, cells C4 and C5. I would just, once I've typed equals, I will click on a cell and you can see that it shows up as C4, and that's the column and the row number. And then if I want to add, I would just press the plus key and then I would click on another cell there. And you can see that Google Sheets actually previews what that number is going to end up being. But if I press enter, you can see that this cell plus this cell equals this. And you can probably already see that that's one way we can get our totals is just by pressing equals and then this cell plus this cell plus this cell plus the total supplies. I wouldn't want to add these and this, because this one is already adding these two together, plus this cell plus this cell. And that will give us the total of adding together all of these cells. So if you click in this editor here, it highlights the cells that you're adding together. So we can see that the monthly total is 12,531. And just to refresh your memory from last video, you can use the fill function by moving your cursor over to the corner. When it turns into a plus sign, you can click and hold down and then move over, and it is going to complete that pattern. It will continue that pattern for different cells. And this is one of the most powerful things that spreadsheet applications can do, because I want you to see what happened to these cells, C4, C5, C6, and so on. If I go over to the next cell, take a look at what it did. It knew that I wanted to, when I used the fill function to move over a cell, it knew that I wanted to move the cells I was referencing over also. So it automatically knew that I wanted to add these cells for this one, these cells for this one, and so on and so on. And that's a really useful thing that saves a lot of time because I only need to type in that formula, all these cells once, and then I can use the fill feature and it will automatically complete it for the following cells. I'm actually going to show another way to do the same thing using a different formula. We were just using the plus symbol to add things together. I want to show you a formula that's called sum. So go ahead and type, you can type equals and then just type the word sum, and you can see that something is popping up here. It's a list of different functions that Google Sheets thinks you might want to use, and it even gives you a little description of what it does. So I'm going to use the sum function, and I'm going to use it by putting a parenthesis, because anything I put in here, it's going to sum. And so I could just use numbers like 8, 9, 10, 11, and it will sum all 4 of those numbers. But instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on a cell. I can press comma and click on another cell, and it will just sum all of the things I click on. But there's another option, and that is I can click and drag over multiple cells, and it will sum all of the cells in that range of cells. And you can see it says it's, okay, you want to sum C4 all the way through C11. But that's a problem because I don't want to sum these individual categories and the total. So I'm actually going to backtrack, and I'm going to highlight these 3 and press comma, and then highlight the bottom 3. And then I'm going to close that parenthesis, and you can see it's going to sum these 3 cells, and it's going to sum these 3 cells all together. And it's going to give us the same number that we got before, but with this different, with this formula. And then I'm going to do the same thing by filling that formula over to get the totals for each month. So I just showed you 2 different ways to add numbers in different cells together. I want to show you next how to take an average. And so let's say we want to know what the average monthly cost for each category is. We can do that by doing the good old mathematical way, right? We could select, we could sum all of these top values, and we could divide by however many there are, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that would give us an average, about $8,070 a month. So that's one way you can get the average, but as you might imagine, there is a function to do that for you. All it is average. Very logical. And so you would just type average, and you can see it gives you a recommendation here. And you can click on that too, and it will just kind of give you that first parenthesis. And then you just highlight the cells by clicking and holding down and dragging across the cells you want to average, pressing parenthesis to close it, and pressing enter. And there's the average monthly cost. And then, as you might imagine, I can fill down by grabbing and dragging down. It will take the average for each one of the rows. And I can check just by looking up in the formula column, and sure enough, it's taking row 5, the average here, row 6, the average here, and so on. So the fill function worked just as we hoped. Okay, so we've learned how to add cells together. We've learned how to average cells, both using the fill formula. Now I'm going to show you how to subtract, and I'm going to show you the difference between a relative reference and an absolute reference. What we were using were relative references because the way that the fill feature works is when you drag a function across, instead of always referencing C4 to C6 and C9 to C11, it knows that you want to shift with the shifting cell. So Excel or Google Sheets interprets, okay, you're adding together the cells above this cell, but if you move over, you probably want to add the cells above that cell. And that's why it's called relative. Relative reference just means relative to the cell you're working on. And it's really helpful if you want to average different rows and different columns. But what if this situation happens? We have a target budget for each month of $12,000. And we want to see, all right, how did each month compare to the target budget. And so why don't we just say, okay, this is the monthly totals, and this we'll say is the difference from budget. And I'm going to go ahead and merge these cells. This is something we learned last time, just to make it a little more aesthetically pleasing, and I'm going to use a right justification so they show up there. And then I'm going to say, all right, I want to know the difference between this number and this number. So I will just go in the cell and press equals, and I will take that cell minus that cell. And we can see that I was $531 over budget in June. Now, what we've been doing before is we've been filling this function by dragging this across. Let's see what happens if we do that this time. If we drag that function across, all of a sudden, this is the same number, and this is the same number, and this is the same number. And if you figured out what is going on here, great job, but it's pretty complicated. What happened was, when I filled over the function, it used a relative reference to say, all right, you want to subtract the one right above, the cell right above, but then it also moved over this cell, and it's subtracting nothing. But we wanted it to stay at this number, right? So we actually didn't want to use a relative reference for this cell, because if we keep dragging, it will reference the correct cell up here for the budget, but it will keep moving the cell that we're subtracting over and over and over as we fill. So I'm going to show you how to stop that from happening. When you are clicking on the cells that you want to subtract, you're going to go and you're actually going to add in money signs before and after the letter, and that tells the program, don't move this cell. I want you to move this cell when I drag the formula, but I don't want you to move this cell at all, because I always want to subtract the 12,000 from whatever I'm moving it to. So let's see if this works. I'm going to go to that cell, and it's got the formula that I want to fill across. I'm going to hold down the button and I'm going to drag that formula over, and sure enough, it looks like it's subtracting this number minus this number. So I was $531 over budget, and then $716 under, and then $2,500 over, and then $1,400 under, and so on. And you can look at the formula by double clicking and see that the B14 is staying constant because that is an absolute reference, while this cell is a relative reference, and it changes as we fill the formula over. And just a real quick pointer, you can also, instead of clicking and dragging a formula across, you can also copy and paste. So if I click copy and then I paste it here, it should do the same thing. It will still use the relative reference here and the absolute reference here, because it figures that what you want to do is apply that formula to the same cell right above it that you did before, but you've told it, don't change this one, and always reference that same cell. So two different ways to copy a function into new cells is using the fill feature, or you can just copy and paste, and it will guess that you want to apply the formula to the same relative cells unless you indicate an absolute cell. So this is a pretty complicated concept, but I hope it makes some sense, and as you play around with it, I encourage you to experiment and try new things, and then to kind of tidy things up to get it to look the way we want. I would center the numbers as we have been doing, and I might even kind of bold these bottom numbers, and by pressing Control U or Command U, I can underline them, even though there's not really an underline button up here. So let's see if it looks something like what we intended it to, and it's pretty close. So as we wrap up for this lesson, hopefully you can see how math functions can be used to subtract and combine values take an average and use both relative reference and absolute reference when you need to in order to copy and paste or fill functions so that it saves time and you don't have to write in a function for every single cell that you want to do. We'll be doing a little bit more with functions in later lessons, but hopefully this was just a quick introduction to some of the things that you can do with functions. And just right before I go, I want to let you know that if there's a math function that you think it would be helpful to have, it's likely that it's already built into the system. And so I would encourage you to say maybe you wanted to try to find out the maximum number in a big list of numbers. So you could actually just Google search how to find maximum number in Excel. And you're going to find a lot of helpful explainers for what function to use. So this one just kind of explains it right in Google, but you can also click here and it will teach you about two functions called max and min, which will just take a group of numbers and it will show you the biggest number or the littlest number. And so you can see in this data set, if you select these cells and use the min function on it, it'll give you the smallest number in the range, and the max will give you the largest number in the range. So there are literally hundreds of formulas. You're not going to be able to memorize them all, but if there's something you want to do, go ahead and search for it, and it should show up pretty quickly about how to use it, and there are great explainers on the internet. Also, you can, in Google Sheets, you can just press the equals and try to take a guess at the formula. Like say you wanted to find the maximum, you could start typing max, and sure enough, it shows up a little help bar right here that there is a formula for that. You can click on it, and actually in Sheets, you can expand this explanation, and it will tell you how the formula is structured. All you need to do is put in values, and it will tell you the maximum value. So let's just test this real quick. Equals max, and I want to see what the maximum value in this column is. Close the parenthesis, press enter, and it turns out 7,450 is the largest number in that range. So just before leaving, I wanted to show you how I go about learning about new functions. So hopefully this was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you in the next lesson.